Internet stocks.
How hot is NASDAQ right now?
Smoking. Red hot.
America Online, the auction site eBay, and the book dealer Amazon, all up more than 40% in December alone.
The internet has become the center of the technology universe.
The internet is being viewed, rightly or wrongly, as the next industrial revolution.
So much money sloshing around and people getting crazy valuations for their businesses.
Every experiment got tried. Every experiment got funded, including the things that didn't make any sense.
Across the board, people had invested millions in web companies with a great name, a great idea, but they hadn't figured out how to make any money yet. Apparently that could be fixed later. It was a recipe for financial carnage.
In early 2000, the NASDAQ lost a quarter of its value. Half of the dot-coms were simply obliterated in the bust that followed. Some $3.5 billion in paper wealth vanished in a year. In the froth of speculation, investors had lost sight of the risks they were taking with no certain prospect of a return.
I think that people got overexcited and believed that the web was creating a completely new way of doing business because it was. And in many ways, it was totally disrupting existing business models. I think that people then thought any old business might work, which was kind of the logic that perhaps was flawed.
People got confused and thought that, oh, if you had a lot of web traffic, that must be incredible. No, building a lot of branches, that's more of a unique asset that somebody else can't duplicate. Building a website, was a kind of overnight thing. And so most of those companies weren't adding that much value. They just hoped that somebody who knew what they were doing would buy them, or somehow their scale would allow them to luck onto a business model.
And yet, the dot-com boom had drawn millions of new users onto the web and made it mainstream. And companies had learned the lesson that it simply wasn't enough to create online versions of traditional shops. They had to rethink what the web could do that would allow them to make a profit. Today, there is a company that has worked this out better than anyone else. Its origins are true to the ethos of the old free web, and yet it's become one of the biggest money-making machines in history. It's changed what it means for all of us to be online.
This company learned to make money from the web, but in doing so, it turned its consumers into commodities. How? By transforming our innocuous and apparently free search for information into an enormous money spinner. This company is Google, and it's turned our curiosity into its gold mine.
Today, Google has an extraordinary grip over the web.
Google today is better than Google yesterday because we just launched a bunch of things that made it better. And it'll be better tomorrow because we're going to launch a bunch of things tonight. It's constantly getting better.
Google makes sense of the web. Every day, over 2 billion searches are made via its search engines in 40 different languages.
Normally, you'd ask a smart person for advice on anything, but now you type into Google and you get tons and tons more information back than you ever got before.
But it's not just search. Its free video sharing site, YouTube, is taking on television.
We crossed the 1 billion view mark per day that we're serving.
We can use Google to fly over the planet or even look over our neighbor's fence. It's even challenging the biggest computer company of all, Microsoft, with a browser and operating system to rival Windows. And unlike Microsoft, what makes Google so unique and so special is that they have become one of the richest and most powerful companies in the world by giving away almost everything that they offer to us consumers for free. To understand what appears to be a paradox, we need to peer behind the screens into the world that Google has built. This is the beating heart of Google. At data centers like this, Google stores information about the web and what we search for. In the last quarter of 2009, Google made over $200 every second from the transactions that pass through data centers like this. Its net profits for the year was $6.5 billion. And that money comes from advertising, tailored around information that we give Google. Every time we use Google, we help them make money. I've come to meet the editor of Wired magazine, Silicon Valley's Bible. He's charted the rise and rise of Google.
One could definitely argue that Google is an advertising company. It's, lots of people do search. And one could argue that Google search is not significantly better or worse than Microsoft's or AOL's or anybody else's. But its hold over advertising is unmatched.
Why do you think the Google business model has worked?
The Google business model is genius. All of the things it does, calendar, mail, maps, photo management, all this sort of stuff, both can be given away for free because the cost of delivering that digital service to you is so low, and increases your attachment to Google. And it will make money from you someday. And whether it makes money when you go to search and it runs ads there, whether it makes money because it's putting ads against other third-party content that you're using, if you have a critical mass of people using Google as a search engine and the largest pool of ads against which to run against these search terms, you're able to match them better. And if you can match them better, advertisers are inclined to use you more, and this becomes a sort of self-reinforcing, positive feedback loop. What Google has is not so much a monopoly on search. The switching costs of search are pretty, one click away. What it has is the beginnings of a monopoly over internet advertising.
The great irony is today's market dominance is about as far away from where Google started out as it's possible to imagine. To understand why Google's become so rich and influential, we need to go back to a more idealistic period in the company's history. Like the web itself, Google began as an academic dream. Stanford University in California has a reputation for academic excellence, but its alumni have a track record of converting research into money.
You don't go to Stanford and not know that there's a very high probability that when you get to the end of graduate school, you are going to start a company, or you might never get to the end of graduate school because you're going to start a company.
Back in 1996, Larry Page and Sergey Brin were PhD students investigating how they could sort the good pages on the web from the dross. The web then consisted of about 10 million pages, compared to the tens of billions today, but it was expanding rapidly. So it was already impossible for humans to visit and rate each website. Page and Brin developed a way for computers to automatically do the job. I went to meet their mentor, Professor Terry Winograd, to find out more about their breakthrough.
They realized that every time a person puts a link on their own web page to some other page, they are in a sense voting. They're in a sense saying, that's interesting enough for me to put a link there. And therefore, if they could add up all of those votes from everybody who built web pages, they would get a result which was going to be a very close approximation to what really is interesting to the general public.
Page and Brin devised an algorithm to calculate links between pages on the web. And it gave an independent mathematical value of how interesting a page was, based on the number of links to it, and whether those incoming links were from pages that were themselves interesting. Page and Brin realized that what had begun as an academic project could actually be used to solve one of the biggest challenges on the web: how to find what you're looking for.
So what is the relationship between interestingness and search?
So having figured out a way to decide which pages were interesting to what degree with PageRank, then it was possible to give search results that were much more useful. So when you did a search for computer, say, it would find all the pages would say the word computer on it. Then the ones that it gave me at the top, at the beginning, at the first page, would be the ones that have the most interestingness, which means that they're the ones I'd be likely to really want to go look at, not the stray junk. So that improved to a tremendous degree the kind of results you could give.
This was perhaps the most effective search engine yet. Page and Brin called it Google. And Google benefited from the web's rapid expansion during the dot-com boom of the late 1990s because its link-counting algorithm actually got better as more pages were added to the web. But they also faced a challenge. Each time someone used Google, they used a little bit of its computer servers. A single digital transaction, like a search, may have a negligible cost, but millions of negligible costs add up to a fortune.
The problem for Google was that as the web expanded, it required more and more expensive processing power and more expensive storage. But it didn't have a real way of making sure that money was coming in.
Larry would come back for advice now and then. He'd just come to the office and we'd have a chat, and we'd talk about the technology and what they were building, and it was all great. And then I'd say, well, but how are we ever going to make money with this? And he would give this sort of smile, little look, and say, I don't know, we'll figure that out later.
Most search engines at that time were funded by advertising, but Larry and Sergey didn't like that. In fact, this is the research paper that they used to present Google to the academic community. And what they said was, we believe the issue of advertising causes enough mixed incentives that it's crucial to have a competitive search engine that is transparent and in the academic realm.
This is what Google looked like in 1998. Free of adverts, simple, clean, and white, Google's looks hark back to the amateurism of the early web. Yet whatever the ideals, Google still had to pay its way. Charging consumers to search was quickly dismissed as an option. Instead, Google realized that they could use their search engine to revolutionize advertising. This was what would change our relationship with the web. They knew that, by definition, when we search for something, we're telling Google our precise wants and desires. And with a system like Google's, those could be easily captured and traded.
What if you knew precisely what your customers wanted at any time and could instantly provide them with it? Well, that's the holy grail that marketers and advertisers have been searching for decades. Because with that information, they could create tailor-made ads that would target directly the customers who were likely to buy their products without wasting money on the people who wouldn't.
Just 2 years after voicing doubts about advertising, Page and Brin went into advertising and changed that industry forever with a system called AdWords. Type in a specific search term, and specific adverts appear in 2 sections of the Google page. Now, if you click on one of those adverts, money flows straight to Google as the advertiser pays for your traffic to their site. For the consumer, it's as simple as that. But what makes this special for advertising companies is that it's so targeted. A selling process initiated by a consumer looking for something in particular.
Unlike the failed .coms, AdWords seem to be the perfect marriage between what the web can do and what consumers want.
The first rule of the internet is that you can speak to each individual as though they're a different person. It's not a broadcast mechanism, it's a narrowcasting mechanism. And what AdWords is it's a single ad to a single person every time.
It's catching people in motion. It's catching people who are already in motion towards something, already goal-oriented, already halfway there.
Through targeted advertising to consumers, Google, and ultimately the web, had found a way to pay for itself. But Google's ambition ran even deeper than money.
Page and Brin wanted to transform the web itself. They built into their advertising machine the analytical insight of their search engine. And crucially, this was what cemented Google's influence on the web.
Their goal was to filter for consumers relevant ads from the irrelevant ones. So every time you activate AdWords by searching on Google, it unleashes a chain of events which can be illustrated like this. Let's say a car company wants to see their ad appear at the top of the page when someone searches for the words new car. They tell Google the amount they're willing to pay to make their advert appear. The process is actually an auction, so lots of companies might be competing for the top spot. But Google doesn't necessarily give the top spot to the highest bidder. It judges ads based on how relevant they are to the search and a range of indicators of the quality of the advertising company's website. In simple terms, P